Look closely at this. An artifact, an ancient text, a fragment of something that, according to researchers, modern engineers still struggle to fully explain, not because our technology is lacking, but because whatever produced this shouldn't have existed when it did. Here is the question that no mainstream textbook wants to sit with for too long. If ancient people were primitive, why do their weapons and machines still confuse our best scientists today? Across thousands of years and dozens of civilizations, there are accounts, some carved in stone, some written in texts, some pulled from the ocean floor, describing technologies of destruction and precision engineering so advanced they feel impossible for their era. Some researchers dismiss them as myth, others aren't so sure. In this documentary, we'll walk through 6 of the most unsettling cases, weapons, machines, and lost formulas that history recorded and then, somehow, forgot. What you're about to hear may not have a clean answer, but the questions themselves are very, very real. Here is what mainstream archaeology tells us. Human technological development follows a recognizable arc. Stone tools give way to bronze, bronze gives way to iron, and each advance builds logically on the one before it. A clear ladder, a traceable climb, and for the most part, that story holds together. Until it doesn't. Because scattered across that timeline are what some researchers have started calling orphan technologies, inventions or techniques that appear in the historical record fully formed, with no clear developmental lineage leading up to them. No prototypes, no intermediate steps, no evidence of the centuries of trial and error that should, by all logic, precede them. They simply appear. And then, in many cases, they vanish just as suddenly. To understand why that keeps happening, you have to look at what civilizations actually lose when they collapse. Consider the Library of Alexandria. Its destruction is historically documented, though scholars still debate exactly when, how, and how completely it was lost. What isn't debated is that it housed an enormous concentration of accumulated knowledge, and that knowledge did not survive intact. We don't know precisely what disappeared with it. That uncertainty is itself the point. Then there is the Bronze Age collapse, a real and still debated historical event in which multiple sophisticated civilizations across the ancient Mediterranean appear to have unraveled within a remarkably short period. Trade networks broke down, writing systems were abandoned, technologies that had taken generations to develop went quiet. Researchers continue to debate the causes, and no single explanation has been universally accepted. But the result is clear: gaps, enormous uneven gaps in what humanity knew how to do. Everything you are about to hear exists inside those gaps. The cases ahead are presented as theory, legend, or disputed interpretation, but the questions they raise are genuine and so far unanswered. And here is the one that should unsettle you most. Every time a civilization collapsed, something was lost forever. But what if some of those losses were not accidents? Imagine standing on the deck of a warship in the 7th century. The Byzantine fleet has just opened fire, not with arrows, not with catapults, but with something that lands on the surface of the water and keeps burning. You try to extinguish it. The water makes it worse. That is not a legend. That is how multiple ancient sources describe Greek fire, one of the most feared weapons in the history of naval warfare, and one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in the history of chemistry. The Byzantine Empire deployed Greek fire for centuries. Chronicles from the period describe it being launched through bronze tubes mounted on warships, a pressurized stream of liquid flame that clung to everything it touched: wood, rope, flesh, and, according to several accounts, the water itself. Enemy fleets reportedly turned and fled at the sight of it. The psychological impact alone is difficult to overstate. Here was a weapon that seemed to violate the basic rules of how fire behaves. The Byzantines understood exactly what they had. According to historical accounts, the formula was treated as a state secret of the highest order, reportedly passed down only within a single trusted family, compartmentalized so completely that even high-ranking military officials may not have known the full composition. When the empire eventually weakened and fell, that knowledge appears to have gone with it. Modern chemists and historians have spent considerable effort trying to reconstruct what Greek fire actually was. Theories have included quicklime, naphtha, pine resin, and various combinations of volatile compounds. Some proposals are chemically plausible. But here is the honest answer. No formulation proposed so far has been confirmed to fully replicate every behavior described in the ancient sources: the self-igniting on water, the adhesion, the resistance to conventional extinguishing methods. Chemists today can make things burn, extraordinarily well in fact, but they still cannot make something burn exactly the way Greek fire reportedly did. And that question, what did they know that we don't, is not a rhetorical one. It remains genuinely open, a weapon so effective it had to be hidden, so secret it was eventually lost, and so strange that centuries later we are still trying to figure out how it worked. Greek fire forces us to accept that a formula can be lost, but what about a machine? What about a physical object, something you can hold, scan, and study under the most advanced imaging equipment available today, and still walk away with more questions than answers? In the early 20th century, sponge divers working off the coast of a small Greek island pulled something extraordinary from a Roman-era shipwreck. It was a corroded, barnacle-encrusted lump of bronze, roughly the size of a shoebox, and at first glance it looked like little more than ancient debris. It wasn't. What researchers eventually identified? Inside that corroded mass was a system of interlocking bronze gears, dozens of them, machined with a precision that, according to researchers who have studied it extensively, was not thought to reappear in European craftsmanship for well over 1,000 years after the device was made. This is the Antikythera mechanism, and unlike many of the mysteries in this documentary, its existence is not in dispute. It is physically real. It sits in a museum in Athens. Researchers have dated it to roughly the 1st or 2nd century BCE, and the scientific community broadly agrees on what it does. It is an analog astronomical computer. Turn its hand-driven crank, and the device tracks the movements of celestial bodies, predicts solar and lunar eclipses, and calculates calendar cycles across multiple systems simultaneously. It is, by any reasonable measure, a machine that should not exist at the time it was built, at least not according to the standard model of how ancient technology developed. Scholars are careful to note that ancient Greek mechanical ingenuity was considerable, and that the Antikythera mechanism may represent an exceptional peak of a tradition we simply don't have enough surviving evidence to fully map. That is a fair and honest caveat. But it also raises a question that no one has cleanly answered. If this level of precision engineering existed, where is the rest of it? This is where some alternative researchers introduce the concept of parts, out-of-place artifacts. It is a fringe term used mostly outside mainstream archaeology, describing objects that appear technologically inconsistent with the era they come from. Most archaeologists are skeptical of the category as a whole, but the Antikythera mechanism is the case that even skeptics find difficult to fully dismiss. We only found it because a ship sank in exactly the right place, at exactly the right depth, in water cold enough to preserve it for 2,000 years. Think about that. One accident of geography and ocean chemistry is the only reason we know this machine ever existed. How many others didn't survive? How many burned in libraries, dissolved in soil, or were melted down for raw material by people who had no idea what they were destroying? Turn now to the Indian subcontinent and to two of the oldest and longest epic texts ever written, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. These are not obscure manuscripts. They are foundational works of Sanskrit literature, composed over centuries and studied by scholars for generations. And buried within their thousands of verses are descriptions that, depending on who you ask, are either extraordinary mythology or something far more unsettling. The texts describe flying vehicles called vimanas, craft said to move through the air with speed and precision, capable of crossing vast distances and carrying warriors into battle above the clouds. The descriptions vary across different passages, ranging from chariots drawn by celestial forces to structured vehicles with defined shapes and movements. Mainstream scholars read these accounts as allegorical, the language of myth, used to convey the power of gods and heroes in terms a human audience could imagine. That interpretation is the widely accepted one, and it deserves to be stated plainly. But the Vimanas are only part of what these texts describe. There is also the Brahmastra, a weapon invoked not through engineering but through focused intention and sacred sound. According to the ancient accounts, the Brahmastra, once released, could not be stopped. It scorched the earth. It poisoned the land for generations. It destroyed everything within its reach in a single catastrophic instant. A minority of alternative researchers, not mainstream historians, have speculatively compared these descriptions to the effects of a nuclear or thermobaric detonation. That comparison is a theory, not a conclusion, and it should be understood as such. One important distinction must be made here. A text called the Vaimanika Shastra, which contains highly technical descriptions of Vaimana construction, is sometimes presented online as an ancient document. It is not. Scholars have established that it was composed in the early 20th century. Conflating it with the genuinely ancient epics is a common and significant error, and one this account will not repeat. What remains genuinely puzzling is the pattern itself. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana were composed independently of Greek myth, of Mesopotamian legend, of Mesoamerican tradition. And yet, across all of them, there are weapons that end wars in a single strike, and vehicles that move through the sky. The mainstream explanation is convergent mythology, the human imagination reaching for the same symbols of divine power. But the question that refuses to go away is a simple one. Why those symbols? Why, in culture after culture, does the most fearsome weapon imaginable look so much like the ones we eventually built ourselves? Step back for a moment and look at the full picture. We've moved through the Byzantine Empire, ancient Greece, and the Indian subcontinent, but the same pattern appears elsewhere, in Chinese military history, in Mesoamerican engineering, across cultures that never had meaningful contact with one another. Advanced knowledge appears, it gets weaponized, and then at some point it vanishes, not gradually, not replaced by something better. It simply stops. Consider Damascus steel. Between roughly the 3rd and 18th centuries, bladesmiths in the medieval Islamic world were producing swords with properties that modern metallurgists still find difficult to fully account for. Exceptional edge retention, a distinctive flowing surface pattern, and a flexibility that seemed to contradict the hardness of the material. Armies across the known world feared these blades, and then the technique disappeared. No one knows exactly why or how. In recent decades, some researchers have proposed a striking hypothesis that the microstructure of Damascus steel may contain carbon nanotubes formed through the specific ore sources and forging processes used at the time. It is a theory, not a confirmed fact, and the scientific community continues to debate it. But the conversation itself tells you something important. We are still trying to reverse engineer a medieval sword. Damascus steel, Greek fire, the Antikythera mechanism, 3 completely different civilizations, 3 completely different technologies, all lost. What are the odds that's a coincidence? The question isn't whether these technologies existed. Some of them clearly did. The question is why they vanished, and whether that disappearance across so many civilizations and so many centuries was accidental or something else entirely. One theory attempts to connect all of it, and it begins with a possibility that mainstream history has never been fully comfortable confronting, that the most dangerous knowledge humanity has ever possessed was not lost by accident, that somewhere at some point a decision was made, that certain things were too powerful, too destabilizing, too catastrophic to be allowed to survive. We have no proof of that. We may never have proof of that. But we do have the gaps. We have the silence where the formulas used to be. We have the shipwrecks and the burned libraries and the collapsed empires. And we have a question that every case in this documentary leaves behind, unresolved and quietly insistent. Are we the most advanced humans who ever lived, or just the ones who survived? If these mysteries stayed with you, explore the sources, share the questions, and keep looking. The most important discoveries in history